Welcome to Straight Talk with Billy Kay. I'm Billy Keyserling, the person who has the distinct honor of being the mayor of my hometown. While the mayor has a lot of responsibilities, I think one of my principal responsibilities is to lead a civil conversation and to share with the people of Beaufort and the surrounding area a lot about what's going on. I do a monthly newsletter, and anyone who wants to get onto it, I'll tell you how to do that. But now we're producing Straight Talk, which is another venue for sharing with you what's happening in Beaufort. Today I have with my guest one of Beaufort's big bad boys. We were both bad boys because we're two of the...
Are you referring to my misspent youth?
That's right.
I thought so.
We're two of the few elected officials in Beaufort County who are actually natives who grew up here and did get into some trouble when we were young. But getting into trouble leads you to learn how to make good decisions.
We're better citizens today.
Now we're better citizens.
That's right.
Speaking of citizens, Paul is the vice chairman of Beaufort County Council. As I said, I'm the mayor of Beaufort. Paul chairs the Natural Resources Committee, and he's also the vice chair of council. And you know, maybe one day he'll be chairman of county council, which would serve us all very well. I thought the idea for this show would be to basically demonstrate that the relationships between government 20 years ago are very different today. 20 years ago, when I was not serving and Paul was not serving, not that the change is just because of us, but Beaufort County and the town of Port Royal and the city of Beaufort very rarely spoke. At that point, we had joint planning, and the county basically told us they weren't going to plan for the municipalities. We shared a joint law enforcement center, and the city of Beaufort was asked to move out of that. We had Port Royal and Beaufort fighting over annexing. And over the last number of years, before I was mayor, but while Paul was on council, the city, the county, and Port Royal have really made great headway in accepting the notion that we work for all the people regardless of the political boundaries, and that we had to work together. Paul sat, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit about the Northern Regional Implementation Committee, which is really where it started.
Sure. As you know, Billy, as Beaufort developed, as it grew in splotches. It grew into rural areas, which created, the problem was created automatically when that happened, because most folks didn't even think about it at the time, but we think about it now. There's a world of difference between rural services and urban services. And so what happened was you had folks putting in urban communities out in the middle of rural Beaufort County and expecting urban services. Right. And the problem exists today to a certain extent, but much less so. An example of how that problem was solved was some of these communities contained their own services. I mean, you had like Dawtaw, for example, pretty much self-contained. I mean, obviously they have to have external police, but they even have their own security. Sun City Hilton Head probably be another example. But there are a lot of examples where people were in rural areas but expected urban services.
One of the answers over the last many years is that recent years, and you were part of the solution, right. Was the town of Port Royal, the city of Beaufort, and the county got together and decided we had to take a regional approach. And we created the Northern Regional Plan Committee, which I think worked for over 5 years. And created a good result. You want to fill people in a little bit about that?
Well, I think everyone, especially those of us who've lived here all our lives, want to see some of Beaufort County remain rural. That's part of the beauty of Beaufort County. We don't want to see everybody building right up to water's edge everywhere in the county, and I think that's pretty much universally agreed on. The question is, how do you do that? I mean, so what we did was beginning, I think, in 2004. See what happens when you're old, you can't remember. 2004, we started the Northern Regional Plan, which essentially divided the county up in areas that could become urban and areas that would remain rural. And this was the first opportunity that Port Royal and Beaufort, this is in the north, the south's a different issue, southern Beaufort County, but in the north, and this was the first opportunity for Port Royal and Beaufort and the county to sit down and really look each other in the eye and say, where is Beaufort, where might Beaufort go, where might Port Royal go, and for that matter, where might Yemassee go coming in from the north? I mean,
we're thinking about the next 100 years, really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people don't think about Yemassee, but there's no reason to think that at some point Yemassee couldn't start coming down from the north. It's small now, but it could. So we sat down, and the problem you had, and as you and I know, when you have disagreements, which you kind of alluded to a minute ago, personalities get involved, and when personalities get involved, then people can become kind of intransigent, and they dig in their heels, and then they don't want to agree to anything. And that's we were at that kind of point. It was very sad. You and I ran for office at a time when we agreed that this is the one thing we have to address, and that Northern Plan gave us an opportunity to really start to do that. And we sat down with a map, and we said, well, where does Beaufort want to grow? And where does Port Royal want to grow, and where might Yemassee want to grow? And we came up with some boundaries that make sense. And if you look at Beaufort's growth boundaries, for example, you can grow up to I think the Whale Branch, and on Ladies Island you can grow all the way to the Coosaw Bridge. Will that happen in my lifetime or your lifetime? Probably not.
Right.
But it takes all of the tension out of those future discussions about, well, wait a minute, that needs to be remain rural. It doesn't. Coosaw was a perfect example of an area where we got to. At one point, we thought that the growth boundary should include Coosaw Island, but we talked about it. And we talked to the residents of Coosaw Island. They said, no, we want to remain rural. So they did. So St. Helena, of course, is rural, and anything north of the Whale Branch is rural. But that was, I think, the beginning of the kind of stability and the kind of working relationship that we have today.
And then Port Royal, which wanted to cross over to Ladies Island, said we won't cross Ladies Island. Right. We want to go up the Broad River, but Beaufort, we don't want you to come too far across 170. So we really sort of had a path for the future. And the next phase, where I did come in, where a lot of people thought we'd never get, was actually the creation and the merging of our planning functions, so that we now really have a metropolitan planning function. So that instead of just Beaufort, when Beaufort was kicked out, Beaufort and Port Royal were both kicked out. They created the Beaufort Port Royal Planning Commission, and through this process we made it now the Beaufort Port Royal Metropolitan Planning Commission, which has representatives from Beaufort County Council as well. Right. So that while it's only advisory, if something's going to happen on Ladies Island, Beaufort and Port Royal are taken into consideration. And that has particular impacts, I think, with transportation. Should have impacts with schools, should have impacts with parks, or when the city's going to do something that might create something that's going to encroach out into an area that's outside of the boundaries, the county's there to say, wait a minute, remember where we're going. And as a result of this, we have 3 comprehensive plans that work together, which is quite a feat in itself. So we have a Metropolitan Planning Commission, we have the comprehensive plans, and we've also taken on jointly the idea of the concept of the form-based code, which is so that there's a universal set of standards, though in each place they may be different, we'll at least talk the same language.
You made a point of saying that the Metropolitan Planning Commission is advisory, and you're absolutely correct. But I hope our folks at home realize that we have a lot of commissions, agencies, and boards that are advisory, but we really take them seriously. And I mean, for example, on Ladies Island, you have the CP committee, which looks at some of these zoning issues early on, and they're advisory, but we take them very seriously. And the various planning commissions, we take them very seriously. By the time they get to the folks, those of us who actually vote on it, I'm sure you would agree, it's been well vetted, and we've listened, and we've read their take on it, and it's unusual for us to go against them. It happens, but. So the Metropolitan Planning Commission was a tremendous step forward, and I think you're right. The form-based code. I was trying to explain that to somebody this morning, and I said, well, it's like this. It has more to do with what it looks like than what's actually in the building. And he said, okay, I understand that. And I said, the problem we've had historically, he said, well, what about the municipalities? And I said, well, we're all trying to get on the same page. That's the whole idea, because that way, where a municipal boundary exists, you won't have an adult bookstore and next to a church. I said, that's theoretically possible now.
Or we won't have people moving from the county into the city just to get around a zoning requirement.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's still the same piece of property. It still has everything around it. Right. So we will be trying to come up with some universality, yet the town of Port Royal will keep its personality and its character. The city of Beaufort will keep its character and personality. Sort of middle areas will be a suburban area, and then we know now for certain until someone changes it, that we really have protected rural areas in perpetuity.
And we essentially speak with one voice. I mean, you kind of alluded to the idea of zoning shopping. I mean, that went on. And sure, you can understand a developer says, well, let's see, I can put a convenience store here and 2 feet this direction, I can put an automobile dealership. So, so now that's not going to be the case anymore. And zoning shopping was I think one of the thorns in all of our sides, because
I think it got us all into trouble and cost us a lot of money.
A lot of trouble.
Cost us a lot of money because we made decisions based on political realities rather than the land use reality. The real let land use be first.
And I think this takes the incentive from the developer standpoint, takes the incentive out of zone shopping, and it takes us out of the position of having to say, well, did we take this guy in or do we not? Because we have different rules.
We got to take a break now, but we're going to come back to the next steps, which is to talk about services, how we deliver services.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Straight Talk with Billy Kay. Today I have with me Paul Sommerville, who is the Vice Chairman of Beaufort County Council and the Chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. And what we've been talking about is the relationships, or the intergovernmental relationships, between the county, the city of Beaufort, the town of Port Royal, and how in recent years through the Northern Regional Planning process we've come together and are working much more closely than the days where, as your last words were, we were talking about zoning shopping.
Right.
And I said, let's go to the next level and let's talk about services. My attitude is, and you and I have had this conversation now for 4 years, is that boundaries are about politicians. Services are about people and the cost of providing those services. And early in the show, we talked about some of the random growth before we had comprehensive plans, before we had controls. So that we have some areas that are not in a city that may be urban in character, where there ought to be mandated curbside delivery, or maybe there may be more intense police coverage. But, and I've said to you, they don't have to annex in the city. If they need a service that the city can provide, then we'll contract with that neighborhood to give them that service. They don't have to come in the city. There was this argument that to live in the city actually cost more because you paid city taxes. We've gotten to the point now where actually in some of the unincorporated areas, because you have the added cost of the fire districts that the city don't have, that, for example, in parts of Burton, you actually pay more when you're outside of the city than you do when you're inside the city, when you look at all the taxes.
That's an interesting and a very important point, Billy. A lot of folks look at their tax bill and they see county taxes and then they see city taxes, but what they don't see is what you said, the fire district, because that can add a lot of mills onto the county. That is essentially a county tax if you're not in a municipality.
That's right, and that's we could talk for hours about the fire districts and how they came and how they've grown and how they're governed, which I think are going to need to be looked at sometime.
Yeah, I agree.
They're sort of autonomous bodies of unelected officials who, through the county, raise taxes and provide services, and does it have the kind of oversight? But I don't. Is
that a discussion for another time?
That's a discussion for another time. Okay. But I think there are ways. We've started a discussion, for example, about parks. City was approached and said they're going to build the park just across the bridge, Crystal Lake Park. Did the city have an interest in it? Well, of course we have an interest in it. It's right next to us. The school is in the city, it'll be an asset for the school.
It may be in the city at some point.
It may be in the city at some point. At the same time, the city of Beaufort spends about $1 million a year out of a $14 million budget between the debt service on the renovation and the higher level of maintenance on the waterfront park. So I'm hoping that we'll get to the point where we can have a discussion about what is a regional asset, and should we manage them together or should we contract with another. We have the ballparks, for example, in the city. They used to belong to the city. When the county created a recreation commission, the city deeded them over to the county, and the county has been managing that. Some parks will be city parks because there will be only about neighborhoods. But the waterfront park, a Crystal Lake Park, some of the land that through the Natural Resources Committee and the Open Land Trust and the Rural and Critical Lands Board.
How about that little yet-to-be-named park on Ladies Island on the left across the bridge?
Well, that's true too.
That's
you know, who's going to maintain it? Who can do it most efficiently? Not who's in charge. You know,
Thank you.
It's just not a question of who's in charge. It's who can do it better. We've both been doing that. But do you see some other areas, or you want to talk more about the parks issue? Because I think that's...
Well, I think the parks issue is a big one. Trash collection is always something that is on a lot of people's radar screen. How do you do it? I think in the city you're doing it very efficiently, but you get outside the city it becomes very problematic, and that's fine, I guess, if you're going to use the county's drop-off centers and you're comfortable with that. But as you get closer and closer to the municipal boundaries, you know, it's.
And you had that problem on Ladies Island when they closed the drop-off center.
Yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden you had some neighborhoods that didn't have the convenience of a place where they could drop their trash on their way to work. So are they going to take it to St. Helena Island, or maybe they're going to concede that they will, you know, want it picked up at their door? And if they want it picked up at their door, should the county create a trash collection division? The city actually closed ours and we contract because we found it more efficient. And with recycling, we actually do it with Port Royal. We've combined, for all practical purposes, our fire department.
And then it becomes a question of should it be mandatory? Because when the answer to that is no, then you automatically have a problem. Then you got yes, no, yes, no, yeah, and it makes it impossible.
Then you get into the inefficiencies of
very inefficient.
I mean, that's the reason the city with only 5,000 houses, but everybody does it. But with Port Royal, you know, go down Waddell Road or Southside Boulevard, part of the street is Port Royal, part of the street is Billy, so our garbage trucks were passing each other. That doesn't really make sense when a truck could go and you could do two sides of the street together.
Yeah, I've forgotten how many carriers there have been on Ladies Island at various, I think there are 4 or 5, it's a lot. And there's no way you can call that efficient.
No. And but letting the private sector have a shot. We only have a few more minutes. There's one thing that I think we share, all of us, as individuals and as governmental agencies, and that is the question about the bases. And we all know it's a given that $1.2 billion, most of which comes into northern Beaufort County, is absolutely critical. You live on Pigeon Point, you represent Ladies Island, you've had some phone calls, as I have, about the F-35 and the compromises we make to remain a strong military town. But the county, as I understand it, has been quite generous in investing in the base realignment defense, if you call it, or I guess it's been moved up. We had a program a couple of weeks ago where we talked about sequestration. Right. But I think if you could share from the county's perspective, I mean, we look at it just from Beaufort County.
Well, we at the elected official level in our administration is very cognizant of the fact that if either of the major bases closes, I'm going to leave the Naval Hospital out of it because I won't call it a major base. If either one of those bases closes, it's going to have such a draconian impact on Beaufort County. I don't think anybody can imagine what would happen if you sucked $500 million or $2/3 of $1 billion out of the economy just like that. I mean, housing values would plummet. I mean, it would be an economic Armageddon, and so the county has always been committed. In fairness, I think some folks in the county may not appreciate that. Maybe folks south of the Broad may not appreciate it, but it's going to have a huge effect on them as well. So the county has always been ready to step up with its pocketbook and its resources, whatever they may be. And our support, whether it be lobbying, we've all done that. I say we, the elected folks, we've done that. And right now we're relying on a group, kind of an ad hoc group that's composed of the chamber and some appointed folks who are working very hard, and we're shoulder to shoulder with them. And I think all members of County Council recognize the importance, and we're doing everything humanly possible to convince our elected officials in Washington to do everything they can to make sure that we don't lose one of those bases.
I don't want to catch you by surprise on this one, so you can. You
mean ambush?
Well, I'm not going to ambush you. Anyway, I guess the last question, or last minute and a half or so, is we're coming upon elections. Everything's going to sort of slow down for a while. There'll be a new chairman of county council. There may even be a new mayor, who knows?
Right.
I hope not, but that's the term limits we have.
Sure,
And,
sure.
what do you anticipate, Paul, in terms of the collaboration, because I think it will go forward regardless, will be the biggest issue for all of us to face, aside from the base closures, in the next year?
The county?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the economy is our biggest issue, absolutely our biggest issue. And you can't talk about the economy without talking about economic development in whatever form you may want to characterize it. So we have to think about what are we going to do to provide some jobs and some economic recovery for the county. And I think that's the area where we're going to have to concentrate. I know the city has stepped up to the plate in a number of areas, and the county has worked on it. We haven't. I don't want to imply that we've had a lot of success at it. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of money on it. But still, even though we haven't had any great successes yet, we still have to keep moving in that direction. And I see some areas for collaboration there with not just Beaufort, but with Port Royal and Hilton Head. I mean, you're talking about tourism, you're talking about industry. There's so many ways you can approach it, but I think that's a big one.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a change, not just our purchasing the Commerce Park,
Mm-hmm.
but the cities, I think, through the county's year of uncertainty, Bluffton, Hilton Head, Beaufort, Port Royal,
mm-hmm.
are all going to take a much more active role. And I think working together with the county, given what is happening in the state with the kinds of industries, I think we have some opportunities.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think we're going to be talking with Hardyville and Yemassee and maybe Ridgeland and maybe
we do have to take that regional approach.
Absolutely.
Anyway, we've run out of time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with me.
All right, it's a pleasure.
And I hope you come back sometime. You've been watching Straight Talk with Billy Kay. If you'd like to be on my newsletter list or you have any comments about this show, please email me at billy@mayorbilly.com. Thanks for listening.